But just to give a couple of examples, and I'll stick with sort of an inbound, interfacility, outbound kind of approach. On the inbound side, we've had situations where, and two different examples. One on an internet retailer. These are mainly retail. We've had certainly some great examples in manufacturing. But an internet retailer went in with, started looking at inbound data, and realized that the some of the costs for the expedited moves hadn't necessarily gone against a particular buyer before, or a particular product group. Might have been segmented off to just expedite it. And so you end up seeing the cost allocated by a product group to know what the cost of goods sold are, but that expedited might have been over in a separate bucket. And when you really allocated those costs against the product group and even to a particular buyer, what was discovered by a particular client was that there was a different picture of profitability by product group, or at least cost by product group, excuse me, and by buyers. So that the buyer who had kind of historically been considered the top person was actually driving an awful lot of that, a disproportionate amount of that expedited cost, and because of that really wasn't the most profitable buyer, which gets into deeply political questions around companies, where merchants are driving the business. And so, that's not an uncommon thing where a bucket of spend is not fully allocated because somebody's taken a modal approach and just saying expedited rather than allocating that back against, again, product groups or buyers. And, again, most of the time, never had the ability to connect the transportation spend, at a PO level with a buyer code. Right? So that's an example, and a real world one that happened just not too long ago. Another example, again for similar kind of reason, on an interfacility basis, where a client it has a lot of say LTL spend that is inbound or outbound generated, and so there's a fairly small component of that LTL spend is inter-facility, in this case inter-store or store-to-store. And so it ends up being, if somebody's modally managing spend or modally looking at spend, it's a small percentage of LTL. Well, when you take that inter-facility or store-to-store spend and connect it, link it with the inventory information, all of a sudden that particular retailer, after a very short period of time seeing that information, drove that to merchant, inventory planners, and it was like, wait a second, these are indications by at a SKU level, or certainly at a product group level, of misallocation of inventory, or misallocation of inventory, and we weren't the ones who were driving that connection back inside the company. So the CFO, unfortunately, is right. Somebody had to go do something with that data, but that opportunity was there once you took the kind of these massive order data sets and these massive parcel and LTL data sets, and married them up in a way, and then exposed the right piece of information. And in that case, the retailer was pretty quickly able to start getting that information in front of the inventory folks. On the outbound side, we've had a few different good examples. In an industrial type of situation, certainly information about what's happening as clients are pushing and pulling orders forward and back, and what the cost is. So what's the cost by change? Again, going to in that case a salesperson. But another one, fairly simplistic but effective, was again I'll use a retail and somewhat internet or e-commerce focused. It's not uncommon for, like you said, use a 3PL and have that 3PL in an area maybe managing West Coast parcel spend for e-commerce outbound, and not really be connecting that data set with a different parcel data set when negotiating those contracts, because it's being handled by a third party, possibly even under a separate contract. And so being able to take data that the sourcing person within a company maybe has never seen that data because it's not sitting in their SAP system, it's somewhere else, and aggregating that for a sourcing spend. And that's certainly the case when you start looking, so you can't really, it's very difficult right now to negotiate a global deal on the parcel guys, so I wouldn't want to pretend that that's easy, but for some companies it's starting. So I mean, there's an inbound, outbound, and interfacility question where it was really about connecting the carrier data, the invoice data, with data sets inside the company, and then having the right partners inside the company to drive a change based on that visibility.